When we talk about life, most people imagine a chain of random events that simply happen to them. But Carl Gustav Jung insisted on something far more radical. Life does not happen to you, it happens through you. The sentence looks simple, yet inside it is a depth that can transform the way you interpret existence itself. Ask yourself honestly, are you sure you are having experiences? Jung would say that, in a very real sense, the experience is having you. For decades, Jung studied dreams, fantasies, personal crises, and the life stories of thousands of patients. Over time, he noticed a consistent pattern. Everything we call life has a certain structure and a direction. It is not merely a chaotic stream of incidents. It is a psychological process that pushes a human being toward a central task, becoming conscious. A life uses every joy, every pain, every meeting, and every loss to draw outward what is hidden inside. You are born psychologically unaware. A child exists, but seen from Jung's perspective, the child does not yet know who they are or why they are here. The child reacts, but cannot name the forces driving those reactions. And from that moment, the movement begins. External circumstances start awakening the inner world. A childhood wound forms a complex that runs behavior until it becomes conscious. A meeting with someone who irritates you can uncover a disowned part of your personality. A repeated life pattern is often a sign that the unconscious is trying to become visible. Jung expressed this idea sharply. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. In other words, what you label as coincidence or bad luck may actually be part of one unfolding process. It is as if life speaks to you through events, pointing to what you do not yet see within yourself. Consider concrete examples. An alcoholic believes they are only fighting addiction, but life is pushing them to face a pain buried deep in the soul. A workaholic thinks they are chasing success, yet the compulsion often reveals an insecurity about self-worth. A person who keeps living through the same kind of breakup is not simply unlucky in love. They may be confronting an abandonment complex. The situations differ, but the essence is the same. Life uses these experiences as instruments to bring the unconscious into awareness. What does this change for you? At first, it can sound like philosophy. For Jung, it was not speculation. It was empirical observation. He watched patients change their lives dramatically when they began to recognize the hidden sources of their suffering. Not because the problems magically vanished, but because the person understood what the problems meant. Pain stopped feeling random. It became part of a path. Imagine that every ordeal you call a difficulty is not merely an obstacle. It is life attempting to reveal what you keep pushing away. A dream you dismiss is the unconscious trying to speak with consciousness. A strange coincidence can be a moment when inner and outer realities align into a single process. Jung lived this directly. In The Red Book, he described experiences in which he realized he was not just Carl Jung having visions. He was participating in a process through which the collective unconscious was becoming conscious. His own life, as he saw it, was one of the ways life came to know itself. Now ask yourself, what if everything happening to you is not chaos and not an accident, but a structured, purposeful unfolding? What if life is not testing you like an exam, but revealing you step by step? Then suffering becomes a kind of birth, and crisis becomes a turning point that leads toward a new wholeness. Life is not somewhere outside you. Life is you. You do not simply live through experience. Experience lives through you. And once you grasp that, perception changes permanently. You begin to notice meaning where you once saw only disorder. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" And you start asking a different question. What is life trying to say through this? At the center of Jungian psychology stands a key idea. Life is an intense dialogue between the ego and the self. The ego is your familiar identity, your name, your biography, the roles you play. It is the part of the psyche that says, "I want, I think, I do." The self is far larger. It is the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, personal and collective. Everything that reaches beyond the narrow individual I. The self contains wisdom, potential, and an inner knowing that often clashes with what the ego desires. Jung saw that this tension runs through every life. The ego seeks comfort, safety, and stability. The self demands growth, truth, and authenticity. The ego tries to preserve what is familiar, and the self breaks limiting forms so the person can move toward wholeness. This conflict shows up in major events. A crisis that shatters a career can be the self's voice revealing that the ego's path has become too narrow. A loss that feels like tragedy can be the self removing what you cling to, making room for something larger. Think of how many times you believed your life was collapsing, only to realize later that the collapse opened new horizons. Jung's point was that the self carries you forward even when the ego resists. The first half of life is usually dominated by the ego. We build identity, establish a career, create a family, reach goals. But in the second half, the self steps onto the stage. It dismantles old structures because it is time for a different direction, the direction of wholeness. And that is why midlife so often brings crisis. It is not a mistake, it is a transition. The self announces itself and demands that life become more genuine. Jung himself lived this conflict. His ego wanted to be a respected physician, a professor, an heir to a scientific tradition. The self pushed him to separate from Freud, to go deeper into the unconscious, and to engage with inner visions and symbols that could easily be mistaken for madness. He wrote about feeling close to disintegration, yet he understood that the tension between ego and self is exactly where real life is born. It is not illness and not chaos. It is a developmental process through which consciousness evolves. This is why it matters to recognize that every difficulty carries meaning. Relationships that challenge your identity may be the self showing the ego its limits. A failure that looks like disaster can shatter false self-images and create space for deeper understanding. The dark night of the soul, when everything feels lost, can be the moment the self strips away illusions so you can touch truth. Life is not going wrong when obstacles appear. It is moving exactly as it needs to. Jung emphasized that the conflict between ego and self does not need to be defeated. It needs to be made conscious. You are not required to win this struggle. You are asked to see it, to participate in it consciously, and to understand that meaning is born in tension. The ego is necessary. Without it, we could not act in the world, make plans, or relate to others. But the ego is not the final truth. It is an instrument through which the self comes to know itself. Life creates situations where the ego is forced to yield, and the self reveals depth. That is what produces the feeling that behind personal wishes there is a wider design. Look at your own experience. What if the crisis that felt like ruin was actually a step toward wholeness? What if the loss was not punishment, but release? Jung urged people to ask these questions and to learn to hear the self's voice within difficulty. Then life stops looking accidental and becomes a process in which even pain has meaning. Everything you live through is a stage on which ego and self conduct an ongoing dialogue. It is not a glitch in the system. It is the system itself. And when you become conscious of this process, you stop treating pain as an enemy. You recognize it as a language through which life speaks. Jung also argued that every person lives inside a story, even if they don't realize it. We do not perceive reality directly. We perceive it through a myth, through an inner narrative we unconsciously create about ourselves and our life. These stories begin in childhood, when we absorb impressions, form images, and build early unconscious scripts. Over time, they become personal myths that shape how we explain every event. Notice how this works. Someone convinced that life is constant battle will interpret every challenge as proof that they must play the hero. Another person living a victim myth will read difficulties as evidence the world is against them. A third, identified with the martyr, will repeatedly sacrifice themselves for others while hoping for recognition or justification for their pain. The events can look similar from the outside, but the meaning we assign to them depends entirely on the myth we are living within. Jung called these narratives archetypal scripts. They are not merely products of private imagination. They belong to the collective unconscious, where all possible roles and images already exist. A person becomes a carrier of these plots without realizing that the plot is directing perception. Patients came to Jung complaining about circumstances, but he often saw that the real issue was not the events. It was the story the person told about themselves. One woman believed she was always abandoned. To her, it was fate. Yet Jung showed her that she unconsciously chose unavailable partners, pushed away those who cared, and interpreted neutral situations as betrayal. She lived inside a myth of abandonment, and every step she took reinforced it. When she started to recognize that script, her perception changed. The events did not vanish, but they stopped feeling like an endless series of tragedies. She saw that it was not life against her. Her own story was shaping her experience. So ask yourself, what myth is moving you? It might be the hero story, the one who must always overcome obstacles. It might be the seeker story, forever searching for answers somewhere outside. It might be the exile story, believing you will never be accepted. These myths are rarely chosen consciously. They grow from unconscious complexes, early impressions, and collective images that come alive in the psyche. Jung stressed that it is impossible to live outside a story. The only question is whether the story will be unconscious or conscious. If the myth is not recognized, it runs your life like hidden code. But if you can see your myth, you gain the ability to participate consciously. The story stops being a prison and becomes a path. This does not mean discarding myth. Human beings cannot live without meaning, but you can change your relationship to it, and you can stop being a passive character and become a co-author. Jung openly acknowledged that his own life was a myth as well. The myth of the explorer of the unconscious, the discoverer of the inner world. He knew it was a story, and yet it gave his life direction and significance. Your relationships, your crises, your victories and defeats, These are scenes in the story your psyche is telling. The task is to notice it and ask, what plot am I living? Is it a myth of victimhood or of awakening? A story of loss or of transformation? Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But for that to happen, you must see the myth you live in and learn to dialogue with it." Every person carries an inner narrative, and that narrative is often stronger than circumstances. Change the story and perception changes. But the events may remain the same, but their meaning becomes different. Then life stops being a blind stream. It becomes a myth you engage with consciously. This is why individuation stands at the center of Jung's work. He argued that the purpose of life is not success and not happiness, but becoming whole. Individuation is not about adding new traits. It is about returning to yourself, integrating what already exists within, but has been repressed or rejected. From childhood, the ego forms. To adapt, a person creates a persona, a social mask, and simultaneously pushes away what is judged unacceptable. That is how the shadow is born. Jung wrote that this is necessary for survival and for fitting into society. But eventually, a moment arrives when the mask becomes too tight, and the rejected parts demand a return. In that moment is where individuation begins. First comes crisis. Old strategies stop working. Goals lose their meaning. It feels like catastrophe, but it is actually an invitation into a new stage. Then the person meets the shadow, traits once labeled unworthy, foreign, or shameful. This is frightening because the shadow appears dark and dangerous. Yet inside, it is strength, creative energy, and authenticity. After that comes the encounter with anima or animus, the inner images of the opposite sex. They appear through relationships, projections, and conflicts. Jung emphasized that recognizing these figures opens the door to a deeper wholeness. The higher stage is the realization of the self, the center that unites opposites. Here, the rigid split between good and evil, light and dark, masculine and feminine begins to dissolve. A person sees they are more than the ego and more than the social role they present to the world. Jung called individuation the road toward wholeness. It is not quick and not linear. It moves like a spiral, where each crisis and each encounter becomes another step forward. Your suffering and your victories are not random. They are tools life uses to bring you back to yourself. Individuation does not make you perfect. It makes you whole. Not flawless, but real. Jung ultimately concluded that a person is not simply living a private life. The person is also a means through which life becomes conscious of itself. Consciousness does not belong to us like private property. In a sense, we are consciousness temporarily taking the shape of an individual existence. That reframes the meaning of everything that happens. Every moment, every joy, and every loss is not only personal experience, it is an expression of a universal process in which consciousness explores its possibilities through a particular human being. Jung wrote that archetypes and the collective unconscious connect us to all of humanity, and perhaps to something even larger than humanity. When you meet suffering, you are not only living your own pain, you become a place where the unconscious experiences limitation, and at the same time reaches toward transcendence. Consider what this means for your life. The death of someone close, the end of a relationship, the loss of a job. These are not random blows of fate. Through you, consciousness tastes loss, transformation, and rebirth. When you feel joy, consciousness learns joy. When you feel fear, it learns fear. And only through such lived experience can it know what it means to be human. For Jung, this was not a vague abstraction. It had practical value. He observed that feeling connected to the larger process makes a person more resilient. They stop interpreting hardship as punishment and begin to sense depth within it. The person is no longer merely a victim, but a participant in a vast movement of consciousness. This understanding liberates. It allows you to live with greater trust. Mistakes stop being sheer failures. They become part of the path consciousness walks through you. Every moment gains value because it is unrepeatable. No one else, ever, can offer the world exactly your view, your feelings, your story. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that also means becoming the one through whom life knows itself. Your duty is not to be perfect or to meet expectations. Your duty is to be as fully yourself as possible, so that life can have the complete experience of what it means to be you.